3:17 a.m. in Baton Rouge. Inside Louisiana's only women's prison, alarms blare. Dorm doors slam. Water rises in the corridors. Inmate Kayla clutches her letters, her hope, and the last thread of control she has over her life. One wrong step could mean disaster. One decision could change everything. This is life behind bars in the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, the only place in the state where women are locked away. And tonight, the walls are being tested in ways no one expected. Inside Louisiana's only women's prison, life behind the bars. Rain had been falling for days. A storm the local news called historic was now pounding Baton Rouge. Inside the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, every inmate and guard knew the risks. Low-lying campus, old infrastructure, a system already stretched thin. Kayla had arrived at the prison months earlier. She wasn't hardened. Her conviction was nonviolent. But she knew that even routine days here could become unpredictable. By midnight, water began seeping into the ground-level dorms. First a trickle, then a rising tide that soaked the concrete floors. Alarms sounded. Lights flickered. The emergency generator roared, and then failed. Inmates were told to stay in their bunks. Guards ran from dorm to dorm. Then the water hit mid-calf. Kayla, gripping a bundle of personal items, knew she couldn't wait. "I had to move," she would later recall. It wasn't just water. It felt like the prison itself was collapsing. Corridors became rivers. Doors jammed. Debris floated past. Panic rose like the water. Kayla fought to stay calm as she reached a cell door, half closed, swollen with water, almost impossible to open. She pushed with everything she had. The latch gave. She stumbled forward into the chaos. And that was where our story began, in the middle of disaster. The real fight for survival behind the walls was just starting. Mornings at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women began early. Dorm lights flicked on at 6 a.m. Inmates rolled out of bunk beds, washed up in the shared sinks, and lined up for breakfast, grits, eggs, and fruit. After breakfast, the routine started. Work assignments, classes, or chores. Some women worked in the kitchen, preparing meals for hundreds of inmates. Others handled laundry or assisted with maintaining the facility. Vocational programs offered training in welding, horticulture, and culinary arts, giving some women a chance at life after prison. Kayla's mornings were quieter. She wrote letters to her daughter and her mother, small threads of connection to the world outside. These letters were her lifeline, her way to hold on to hope. The atmosphere was tense, but manageable. The guards maintained control, but there was always an undercurrent of worry. Conflicts could flare up over anything: a stolen snack, a harsh word, or a misplaced item. The women learned quickly to navigate the delicate balance of survival, alliances, and caution. Life here was predictable, almost monotonous, but every inmate knew it could all change in an instant. Weather events, staffing shortages, or even small mistakes could turn an ordinary day into chaos. In August, the calm was about to end. The news warned of heavy rainfall and potential flooding. Guards double-checked evacuation plans. Inmates murmured anxiously, sensing that something bigger than routine was coming. Kayla tucked away her letters, returned to her bunk, and tried to focus on the day ahead. Little did she know, the storm would hit sooner and harder than anyone expected. It started slowly. Around midnight, water began creeping into the ground-level dorms. At first, it was just damp floors, small puddles that seemed harmless. But within minutes, the water was rising, pooling in corners, flowing under doors. Kayla woke to the sound of splashing and shouting. The emergency alarms had gone off. Lights flickered, then cut out entirely in some areas. The backup generator kicked in, but barely. The hum was uneven, unreliable. Guards rushed from dorm to dorm, shouting instructions. Stay calm. Get to higher ground. But calm was impossible. Corridors filled with water quickly, making movement dangerous. Debris floated past, carrying everything from soaked bedding to personal items inmates had clung to for months. Kayla grabbed her letters, her small bundle of belongings, and ran toward the main hallway. Her heart pounded as she tried to navigate the flooded corridor. Around her, panic erupted. Women were crying, yelling, trying to help one another, but the water was relentless. Then she reached the cell door, the same door we saw earlier in the hook. Swollen with water, jammed, unyielding. She pushed, heaved, shoved. Every second felt like a lifetime. She could hear the shouts of guards and inmates behind her. Someone screamed, "Move faster." Finally, the door gave way. Kayla stumbled into the hallway, water now up to her waist in places. Around her, chaos reigned, broken furniture floating, lights flickering, alarms blaring. The storm outside had invaded the prison inside. She realized something terrifying. Escaping the flooding wasn't just about getting to the next corridor. It was about surviving the night, staying alive until the storm passed, and finding her fellow inmates. And in that moment, she knew the life she had inside the prison, the routines, the small hopes, the fragile safety, was gone. Everything had changed. The water continued to rise. The dorms that had once felt like a cage now felt like a trap. Kayla pressed on, unsure what awaited her at the end of the corridor, or if she would make it out at all. By morning, the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women was a different place. Hallways that had been familiar were now filled with debris. Concrete floors were slick, bunks were ruined, and the smell of damp and mold hung in the air. Parts of the prison were still underwater. Inmates were moved to temporary housing inside the facility or to other state prisons. Kayla found herself in a makeshift dorm far from her friends, her routine shattered. The small comforts, her bunk, her daily schedule, her letters, were gone. But the real struggle wasn't over. It was emotional. Guilt, fear, and uncertainty pressed on every inmate. They whispered, "What if someone didn't make it? Or will I ever see my family again?" The flood had exposed the fragility of life behind bars, the vulnerability that no one outside could imagine. The institution promised reforms. Plans were made for a new facility in St. Gabriel, designed to withstand flooding. Yet inside the walls, the trauma lingered. Inmates like Kayla had to rebuild trust, safety, and routines from scratch. Every day was a reminder that control was an illusion. Kayla sat on a hard plastic mattress, staring at the walls that had once contained her. She asked herself, "If I survive this, what will I become?" Survival here wasn't just about escaping the flood. It was about enduring the life inside these walls, the constant pressure, and the struggle to hold on to hope. And though the storm had passed, another storm was already brewing. Kayla knew the fight wasn't over. She had to navigate alliances, confront threats, and find a way to reclaim her identity within the prison system. The flood had passed, but life inside the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women was far from normal. Kayla found herself in a new dorm, surrounded by strangers. Some were scared, some were hardened, and some were waiting for the slightest weakness to take advantage. In prison, every day was a battle for respect, safety, and control. Simple things, a bunk, a shower time, or a slice of bread, could spark conflict. Alliances were formed quickly, often as fragile as the flood-damaged walls around them. Kayla had learned to read people, to sense danger before it struck. She found a small group of women she could trust, those who had survived the flood together. But even within this group, tension simmered. One morning, as Kayla collected laundry, a fight broke out nearby. Voices screamed. Furniture crashed. Guards rushed in, separating the women before anyone was seriously hurt. But the message was clear. Survival meant vigilance. Every decision mattered. Meanwhile, Kayla clung to her letters and journals. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process fear, anger, and hope. She recorded stories of the women around her, their crimes, their regrets, their small victories, and their private fears. Outside, news of the flood's impact had reached families and the public. Some blamed the state. Some blamed the prison system. But inside, none of that mattered. What mattered was the next meal, the next shift, the next decision that could keep a person alive or put them in danger. Kayla realized that survival wasn't just about escaping the flood. It was about navigating a world where power, fear, and desperation intertwined. One misstep, one wrong word, and everything she'd fought to hold on to could vanish. And then came a whisper, a rumor about contraband being hidden in the flood-damaged wing. Eyes turned, alliances shifted, and tension rose to a new level. Kayla felt it immediately. Something big was about to happen. The rumor spread like wildfire through the dorms. Contraband had been hidden in the flood-damaged wing. Phones, drugs, cigarettes, items that could give power to those who controlled them or destroy those who got caught. Kayla felt a chill. The flood had already changed everything. This could change it even more. Whispers turned to accusations. Friends eyed each other nervously. Alliances were tested, some broken in the blink of an eye. By afternoon, the dorm was tense. Kayla noticed subtle signs, furtive glances, whispered conversations, women sneaking out during guard checks. Even the guards seemed on edge, aware that the flood had left vulnerabilities, both in the infrastructure and in the inmates' behavior. Kayla's small group decided to investigate quietly. They didn't want trouble, but they also didn't want to be blamed for something they didn't do. They searched the damaged hallways, careful to stay out of sight of guards and rival inmates. And then it happened. Behind a partially broken wall, they found it. A hidden stash of items washed into a secret corner by the floodwaters. Cigarettes, a small cell phone, even some money that had gone missing weeks ago. Panic set in. A misstep here could ruin everything. Some women wanted to report it immediately. Others argued they could use it to gain influence or protection. Kayla realized quickly, every choice carried a price. That night, as she lay on her plastic mattress, Kayla stared at the ceiling and asked herself, who can I trust? How far will people go for survival? And somewhere in the dorm, a shadow moved silently. Someone watching, someone deciding how this discovery would be used. The flood had ended, but a new storm of danger, betrayal, and power struggles had begun inside Louisiana's only women's prison. The next morning, the dorm was heavy with suspicion. Whispers floated like ghosts. Who had seen what? Who knew the contraband? Who could be trusted? Kayla knew staying neutral wasn't an option. Every move, every word, could decide her fate. By mid-afternoon, a confrontation ignited. One of the more aggressive inmates accused another of hiding part of the stash. Voices escalated into shouting. Tension, already taut from the flood and days of uncertainty, snapped. Kayla tried to stay back, observing, calculating. She realized that this wasn't just about contraband. It was about control. Whoever claimed dominance over the hidden items could gain influence, protection, and leverage. And losing meant being targeted. Suddenly, a physical scuffle broke out. Bunks were shoved, mattresses overturned. Guards rushed in, shouting commands. But they couldn't stop the chaos immediately. Women scrambled, some to protect themselves, others to grab the stash, others to prevent a friend from being harmed. Kayla acted instinctively. She grabbed her closest allies and pulled them into a safe corner, avoiding the violence. Her heart raced. The dorm that had been her temporary sanctuary now felt like a battlefield. By the time the guards restored order, the contraband was gone. Someone had taken it during the chaos. The accusation, the trust, the fragile alliances, all shattered in a few minutes. Kayla sat back on her mattress, bruised but alive, and realized something crucial. Survival in this prison wasn't about obeying rules. It wasn't even about the flood or the stolen items. It was about understanding the unwritten code of the dorm, reading people faster than they could read you, and knowing when to act, or when to stay invisible. And in that moment, one question haunted her. Who had taken the stash? And more importantly, what would they do next? Days passed after the contraband confrontation, but the tension never left the dorm. Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her every move. Allies whispered, rivals plotted, and the balance of power had shifted in ways she didn't fully understand. Then came the announcement. Some inmates, including Kayla, were to be transferred to a different section of the prison, part of a temporary relocation after the flood damage. New environment, new faces, new rules. Kayla packed her few belongings with care. Every letter, every journal, every small possession was a piece of herself she refused to leave behind. But she knew this transfer could be dangerous. Moving through the corridors, she sensed subtle glances, veiled threats, the quiet calculation of inmates sizing up who might be vulnerable. The new wing was smaller, older, and less organized. Security was stricter in some ways, laxer in others. Kayla noticed groups forming quickly, alliances made for protection, others for dominance. She realized she would have to navigate this world even more carefully than before. During the first night in the new dorm, Kayla overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Some inmates were planning to target anyone who had been near the contraband in the old dorm. Names were whispered. Suspicion lingered like a shadow. Kayla's mind raced. She could no longer rely solely on her instincts or her small circle of allies. She needed a plan, someone to trust, a way to defend herself, and a path to survival without drawing attention. The flood was gone. But now, the real storm was inside the prison, and it wasn't just water she had to escape. Kayla quickly realized that staying invisible wasn't enough. The new wing demanded action, or you became a target. Allies were scarce, enemies plentiful, and the rumor about the contraband still hung in the air like a shadow. She observed quietly at first, mapping the social dynamics. Who answered to whom? Who controlled resources like extra food or access to phones? Who had grudges that could turn violent in an instant? Every detail mattered. Then she made her move. During an evening chore, she approached one of the quieter inmates, someone who had kept to herself but had a reputation for honesty. Kayla offered a simple proposition. We look out for each other. Small things. No risks, but we watch the bigger picture together. The inmate hesitated, suspicion in her eyes. Kayla knew trust was fragile here. Even a small mistake could be deadly. But she persisted, emphasizing mutual benefit, protection, information, and survival. By the next day, they were quietly working together, sharing information about who to avoid, which guards were lax, and which inmates were most likely to cause trouble. It was a small alliance, but it was enough to tilt the balance in Kayla's favor. That night, as Kayla lay on her thin mattress, she thought about the past weeks, the flood, the contraband chaos, the betrayals, the moves she had to make just to survive. And she realized the truth. This was a game she could not afford to lose. Then came the whisper that made her blood run cold. Someone had tipped off the guards about her movement in the old dorm. The flood was over, the contraband gone. But now, Kayla faced a new danger, one that could unravel everything she had worked for. The next morning, Kayla sensed the tension before she even stepped out of her bunk. Guards were moving differently, alert, watchful, scanning faces with a sharpness that made the air feel heavier. Rumors had reached them. Someone had been too active in the old dorm, and Kayla's name had surfaced. She tried to stay calm, but every step felt like walking on a tightrope. A simple mistake, wrong word, wrong glance, could bring serious consequences. During routine head count, a guard singled her out. Step forward, he commanded. Kayla's pulse quickened. She knew this was more than a routine check. Someone had set her up. She complied, hands slightly trembling, and felt every pair of eyes in the dorm on her. Allies froze, rivals smirked. The weight of weeks of tension, alliances, and survival strategies seemed to hang on this one moment. The guard asked questions about her movements, about her companions, about the hidden contraband. Kayla answered carefully, truthful enough to avoid suspicion, vague enough to protect her allies. After what felt like hours, but was likely minutes, the guard stepped back. Kayla wasn't alone in the room. She could see the faint, silent acknowledgement from her small alliance. Survival had, once again, required strategy, patience, and instinct. But the incident left her shaken. Kayla realized that in this prison, danger came not only from floods, fights, or hidden items. It came from every direction: inmates, authority, and even the environment itself. As she returned to her bunk that night, Kayla couldn't shake one terrifying thought. Someone had set her up deliberately. And if she didn't figure out who, the next storm, inside or out, could be the one that finally broke her. After the guard incident, Kayla knew she couldn't remain passive. Someone in the dorm had tipped off the authorities, and if she didn't find out who, the next move could be far more dangerous. She began observing quietly, watching patterns, reading behaviors, listening to whispers. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every small gesture could reveal a clue. But in the prison, appearances were deceiving. Friends could betray you, and enemies could pretend loyalty. Her small alliance became her eyes and ears. Together, they mapped the dorm, noting who interacted with whom and who seemed nervous or secretive. Kayla realized the betrayal had likely come from someone on the periphery, someone not yet fully trusted or integrated into the larger groups. One night, during lights out, she noticed a shadow moving in the hallway. A figure slipped between bunks, avoiding both guards and her allies. Kayla's instincts screamed that this person was involved, but confronting them directly would be dangerous. She needed proof. Over the next days, Kayla orchestrated subtle tests, leaving misleading hints, watching reactions, observing who moved when guards weren't looking. Slowly, the pieces began to form a pattern. Someone she had considered neutral was acting strangely, positioning themselves near certain areas at key times, listening more than speaking. Kayla realized the prison had changed again. The flood was gone, but now the real danger was human, someone inside, willing to manipulate fear and authority to gain power. And when she finally identified the likely traitor, Kayla knew the next confrontation wouldn't just be about survival. It could decide her entire future inside these walls. Kayla had been patient. Weeks of observation, whispered hints, and careful planning had led her to one inmate, the person who had tipped off the guards. A quiet, unassuming woman named Marcy, who had always stayed on the edges of dorm activity, seemed harmless at first. But Kayla had learned that appearances in this prison could be deadly. One evening, when the dorm was quieter than usual, Kayla confronted Marcy. "I know what you did," she said, her voice low but firm. "If this happens again, it won't just affect you, it'll affect all of us." Marcy froze. For a heartbeat, the dorm seemed to hold its breath. Then she smirked, a chilling, calculating smile. "You think you know everything, don't you?" she whispered. "You have no idea what's coming next." Kayla realized she had underestimated Marcy. This was no ordinary betrayal. It was a warning. Someone had been watching her as closely as she had been watching others. And now, Kayla understood the harsh truth. Survival wasn't just about reacting. It was about anticipating the moves of those willing to do anything to gain control. Tension exploded when a sudden shout echoed from the hallway. Guards had caught another incident. Someone had tried to smuggle a small item through the wing. Chaos erupted again. Alliances fractured under stress, screams filled the air, and Kayla was forced to retreat to a safe corner. As she crouched there, heart pounding, she realized the stakes had risen. The flood, the contraband, the betrayals, none of it compared to what was coming next. And deep down, Kayla knew one thing with absolute certainty. In this prison, no one was truly safe, and the next twist could change everything she had fought for. The dorm had settled into an uneasy quiet after the chaos with Marcy, but Kayla knew better than to trust the calm. In the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, danger often arrived quietly, then exploded without warning. The next morning, rumors spread. A fight had broken out in another wing, leaving one inmate seriously injured. Panic rippled through the prison. Guards tightened security, movement became restricted, and the sense of normalcy vanished completely. Kayla realized this new threat wasn't just about individuals. It was about the structure of the prison itself. Tensions were high, alliances were fragile, and every inmate was on edge. Even a small mistake could ignite another violent confrontation. She doubled down on her vigilance. Every conversation was measured, every glance calculated. Her alliance remained small, but it was her lifeline. She started documenting patterns, noting which inmates tended to escalate situations and which could be counted on to maintain order, or at least self-preservation. Then came the message that shook her to her core. Someone had been planning a more significant act of defiance in the prison, a coordinated attempt to seize control of part of the wing. If it succeeded, it could lead to chaos, injuries, or worse. And according to whispers, Marcy was somehow involved. Kayla's heart raced. She had survived floods, betrayal, and close calls with the guards. But this was different. This wasn't a single threat. It was a storm gathering in human form. And she knew that her next move could determine whether she survived the night or became a casualty in the struggle for power inside the prison walls. Kayla knew waiting was no longer an option. The whispers about the coordinated takeover had spread through the dorm like wildfire. Fear and uncertainty were everywhere. Every inmate seemed tense, every glance potentially a threat. She gathered her small alliance in a quiet corner, away from the other women. "We can't wait for this to happen to us," she said. "We have to take control of what we can, protect ourselves, and stay alive. One misstep, and we'll all be at risk." Together, they planned a careful strategy. They would monitor the key areas of the dorm, watch for suspicious movement, and make sure no one could catch them off guard. Timing was everything. That night, the plan was put to the test. Shadows moved in the hallway. Footsteps echoed. Kayla's heart raced as she followed her instincts, signaling her allies silently. They intercepted a group trying to sneak through the dorm to seize control. A tense standoff ensued. Words were exchanged. Threats flew. One wrong move and the guards would be called. Or worse, someone could get hurt. Kayla's careful planning paid off. They managed to prevent the takeover without alerting the guards immediately. But just as she breathed a sigh of relief, she noticed a figure watching from the shadows, someone she didn't recognize. The silhouette was deliberate, patient, and menacing. Kayla's stomach dropped. She realized in that instant that while she had survived the flood, the contraband, and the betrayal, the prison had yet another challenge for her, one that could change everything in a single moment. Kayla's pulse raced as the shadow stepped closer. Her instincts screamed that this was no ordinary inmate. It was someone who had been planning, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. Every lesson she had learned about survival, trust, and strategy was about to be tested. The figure revealed herself, Marcy, the quiet, unassuming traitor from before. But this time, she wasn't just plotting behind the scenes. She wanted control, and she was ready to escalate the chaos that had already consumed the dorm. Kayla held her ground. "This ends tonight," she said, steady despite the fear gnawing at her. She signaled her allies, and together they formed a barrier between Marcy and the rest of the dorm. Words were exchanged, threats, warnings, and accusations. But this confrontation wasn't just verbal. Every movement was a calculation. Marcy lunged, trying to intimidate, but Kayla anticipated her actions, staying one step ahead. The standoff drew the attention of the guards. Marcy was restrained, and the dorm slowly returned to an uneasy calm. Kayla realized something profound. Surviving the floods, betrayals, and chaos had taught her more than any classroom or program ever could. She had learned how to navigate fear, make alliances, and stand her ground in the most dangerous of situations. As she returned to her bunk, bruised but unbroken, Kayla understood the truth. Life behind bars in Louisiana's only women's prison was unpredictable, relentless, and brutal, but she had survived. For now, inside Louisiana's only women's prison, survival isn't just about following the rules. It's about strategy, courage, and knowing who to trust. From floods to betrayals, every day is a battle, and every choice could change your life forever. If Kayla's story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next true crime story we uncover. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you were trapped in a place where every move could be life or death? Remember, the walls hold more than just prisoners. They hold stories, struggles, and survival against all odds. Stay tuned, because the truth behind bars is always more intense than fiction.